Thank you. Welcome to your brown bag session, your lunch and learn on GCP Compliance Solutions. My name is Pamela Mason. I've been teaching here at Northwestern in the School of Professional Studies for about 5 years. Several of my students, current and past, are in the room, so I feel lots of pressure to deliver what they're accustomed to. And they know I'm not accustomed to sitting, so it's going to be hard. I'll be twisting and squirming in my seat the whole time. But my background is one of both an actual doer, so one who's actually worked in the pharmaceutical industry, medical device field, a consultant, and then also an educator on the back end. So I've been with many companies in this area. I've worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers as a consultant to help those companies that are in trouble and struggling. I've been an auditor out in the field doing audits in every country you can think of, except for a couple that, of course, I never got to go to. But I've been behind big companies who are trying to get drugs to market, big companies challenged with compliance solutions, and then small companies who just didn't have the manpower, the resources, the wherewithal to even understand what the regulations were asking. So why this topic? So this topic is not a silver bullet. This topic is not an easy answer to your compliance challenges, but it certainly is one that we know from the quality side of things, it works. So for those of you who had my Intro to Quality Systems course, my Six Sigma Green Belt course, you know that quality assurance is as integral to what you do in clinical research as anything else. It's important in that it helps to bring everything together, and it's important in that it helps to ensure that the work that you've done, the hard work you've done, hasn't been lost. It is the quality assurance folks of your organizations that kind of a little bit better understand what the regulations are, what they're asking for, and what the need is to be compliant. And it's also the quality assurance folks who understand why you are challenged with this constantly. The drug development life cycle hasn't changed that much. A couple new regulations, a couple new amendments to regulations, a couple of new patent exclusivities that are being offered for orphan drugs. But ultimately, what you're doing to get a drug to market has not changed, but your challenges have changed because technology has changed and we want the data faster and quicker. So this presentation just helps you to look for simple ideas to help you determine what's the best route from my site, my IRB, my CRCs, my study coordinators, my monitors to take when they're faced with a GCP challenge. One thing the presentation will tell you that the FDA's expectations have not changed. They are as boring as you think they are, and they are also as consistent as you think they are. They are a government agency with auditors, inspectors trained to conduct audits, and they do have a certain level of expectation that doesn't change much. And when it does change, it's rare and it's minor. So what I hope to do in this presentation is to cover a little bit of where the common sources are to give you information, data, and background on where to find the challenges that companies, sites, organizations face when being compliant. And being a quality assurance professional, I'm stuck on data. So being a Six Sigma Green Belt, we believe in data. We don't make decisions based on subjective opinions. We don't really care. If you think it's the coordinator who did something wrong, it doesn't really matter. We need to see the data. The data tells us everything before we make a decision to fix, to correct, to modify. So what are the sources that I go to? I look at what the Office of Scientific Investigation has, and I look at metrics. And depending on what you guys do for a living, metrics may not be a big part of your life, but it's a huge part of our lives in the quality assurance world. We thrive on metrics. Those daily, monthly, year-to-date numbers that you track because your boss wants you to tell them how many patients were enrolled, how many patients dropped, how many protocols were received for review, how many IRB packets were rejected. Metrics are everything that we use to help us determine how well we're doing or how poorly we're doing. So it is the metrics that we live by. Also, reading the FDA warning letters. I know it sounds exciting. And it is exciting if you're a quality assurance professional. But from the warning letters, we find out what the FDA's expectations are. We find out why they ding certain investigators much harder than you anticipated, and why some sponsor companies got a slap on the wrist. We also find out what their thought process was in regards to the practical, real-life interpretation of regulations written 50 years ago. And that's what sometimes is missing when you come to work to do your job with SOPs. It's how do I make this regulation make sense to me? I'm following my SOPs, but I'm still not fully compliant. We're still struggling. We're still getting over the hurdles. I also look at complaints filed by sites, IRBs, and vendors. So for any of you guys that are monitors, when monitors come out, they have the first-hand experience to hear what the sites are not happy about. So listening to your sites, listening to IRBs, listening to even the vendors you hire to work with you will tell you immediately where there's an opportunity or potential for there to be a defect, a deviation, a violation to the protocol, and more important than anything else, a variation in what they're producing for you. And you don't want that. You want to make sure that protocol is done according to the way the protocol was written. Also, sponsor audit observations. The FDA allows every company to conduct audits. They want you to conduct audits. And did you know it's the only area that they won't look at when they come out to do an inspection? Well, that and your personnel records. Everything else, the FDA has free range and free access to when they come out to do an audit or inspection, whether it's for cause, routine, follow-up. They won't look at your audit data unless they feel you were aware of fraud or misconduct or other serious issues and chose to hide it, bury it in your audit data. Then they'll get an order from their district officer to look at your audit data. But we encourage sponsor companies, sites, CROs to do audits. Audit yourself. Also, monitoring observations. I've never met a monitor or monitoring group or organization who did not write the most thorough monitoring reports possible, because that monitor wants to protect himself or herself, right? So they go out to a site and they have serious concerns. Watch what's buried in the monitoring report. Read the monitoring reports. And sometimes that doesn't happen. We're not reading the monitoring reports. We're getting them. We're stamping them in. We're filing them in our essential documents or regulatory binders, but we're not reading what the monitor took time to document, because he or she is going to do an excellent job of ensuring that on October 1st, I warn the site of the following numbers of deviations, protocol violations. So what are some of the common challenges? Some of the common challenges that we hear as to why sites cannot be GCP compliant is that our site is too small. You know, they go immediately to the size of the site, the size of the organization, staffing issues. We don't have enough people, too many protocols, not enough hands on deck or on board to do the work. We also hear about investigator oversight, and that's consistent with what the FDA is saying as well. How many protocols can an investigator, PI, sub-I actually manage and know? And sign off on clinical labs, and sign off on adverse events and SAEs. How many? How many is too many? How many delegation of authority forms can that PI sign and really know, if he goes on vacation, who's doing what for each protocol? We also hear about qualifications and experience of the site, the CRO, and IRB staff. Are you hiring the right people to do the work? And the FDA is one of those few regulatory agencies that in their actual regs, they actually say your people must be trained, your people must be qualified to do their job. And that's one of those additional tenets that ties directly into quality systems management and quality assurance. It's true. Qualifications and experience of your staff is key to running a successful organization and to running an organization that won't be faced with surprises in deviations, surprises in violations. Whose responsibility is it to train your staff? We always say the employee, right? Employee, make sure you go for your training, ask for your training. According to the FDA, when they come out to do a systems inspection, it's the management's responsibility to ensure that their people are adequately trained and qualified. So yes, every employee has their own responsibility, but ultimately the manager is responsible for ensuring that that staff is trained. Protocol complexity. You have opportunities and chances here to reject protocols every day, but we often don't, right? We receive every protocol, we say we can do the study. Protocol complexity can be a challenge to a lot of sites. Every protocol is not for every site. They're truly not one size fits all. And if a protocol will make an investigator violate what they do as part of their SOPs, they shouldn't participate in that protocol. We have challenges constantly on the GCP training side to convince investigators that your job as an MD or doctor ends when you become a principal investigator. Principal investigator has to follow that protocol no matter what, no matter how different it may be from their standard practice or standard care. The hat comes off for the MD, the hat for the PI goes on, and there's this whole new set of regulations called GCPs, whether they're ICH GCP E6 or all the regulations that the FDA has pushed out that govern good clinical practice. That's what that investigator has to follow. And then don't forget us back at the sponsor company. We want our patients enrolled on time. We have milestones set. You see the Gantt charts coming your way over email. We have deliverables we have to meet, so you're under pressure. And when an organization or team is under pressure to get things done, to enroll patients, then they will be faced with GCP challenges. Things that could be done correctly all of a sudden may not be done as thorough as they could be. So we understand that timelines, milestones, deliverables do challenge your sites, your organizations, but they have to be things that are dealt with ahead of time and proactively. Also, regulations. The regulations aren't clear all the time. They can be considered vague. It is left to the interpretation of a skilled regulatory affairs professional or quality assurance professional to make sure that your SOPs that govern what you do, your SOPs, processes, work practices, your policies match, are consistent with, support the regulations. Remember, when the FDA wrote the regulations for good clinical practice, they came about because we were doing things wrong. Not one of them came about proactively, right? They are always written in response to the way in which we were conducting clinical research, the way we were making products, manufacturing, selling. So keeping that in mind, you can understand kind of the flavor of the regulations. They are intended to establish controls for how we make investigational drug product, how we enroll patients into clinical studies, and then ultimately how we get that drug to market. Controls. With proper controls in place, the FDA feels you can easily reproduce, recreate, provide verification, provide documentation, and you can also ultimately control variation and defects and violations from happening, which is why they encourage you to write SOPs. One SOP, 85 people doing the same thing can guarantee the same product each and every time. Also, culture. So the last one that I'll mention that is a true challenge for a lot of organizations and a true source of your challenges is culture. And that simply means, what do you believe about quality? How do you feel about the FDA? I've worked for Abbott Labs, I've worked for GD Searle before they became Pfizer, I've worked for Takeda, I've worked for many pharmaceutical companies in this area, and I've consulted with some of the bigger companies on the East Coast. But what does your culture say about quality? Do you believe the FDA? Do you like the FDA? If you don't like them, that also can be a problem when it comes time to talk with them, to negotiate with them, to understand why the inspector is asking you for what he or she is asking for. Is the FDA qualified? Absolutely. Are they all qualified? Absolutely. Maybe not to do what they're doing at your site, but they are qualified. They're trained inspectors and auditors to come out and look for, to dig through data and information and say, has the letter of the law been met? So when you're looking at a warning letter, you must understand that there's much more that went wrong than just not crossing a T or dotting an I. It takes a lot for the FDA to write a warning letter. It takes more than one person, not just an inspector or auditor, but several people back at the home office to look at and issue the warning letter. So what does your culture say about quality? What do you believe about quality? Do you believe that it's okay to enroll patients that you know violate the protocol? Or do you believe it's absolutely not okay? Do you believe it's okay to correct the deviation and make sure it's documented and make sure 2 years from now we know what went wrong and how we fixed it? That's culture. Are you comfortable confronting a protocol or a monitor or a coordinator that's doing something wrong that may put not just your organization in trouble, but the whole feeling about clinical research at that organization in trouble? So there are tons of case studies out there, right? I love case studies. My students read case studies, present case studies that go through best practices and some of the worst practices for Six Sigma, green belts, for quality systems. And case studies are out there about fraud and misconduct as well. I teach a fraud and misconduct course for the University of Chicago for their Graham School of Continuing Study. And we go through the case studies that built the regulations to get us here. And most of them were from those fraud case studies, fraud and misconduct. Touchy issue, but real life issues, right? Sometimes you just don't know what you should do. Sometimes you do know, but choose not to. We want to make sure you always avoid that possibility that your staff, your employees, can go down that path of true misconduct and put the entire organization in a bad light or in a bad position with the FDA. So think about your culture. Not every culture loves quality. Not every culture loves correction. Not every culture believes in what the FDA is telling us. But there are some who do, and they have far less issues with the FDA. Okay. So where did I get my data from? Right from the FDA's website, there are tons of data out there about what they're finding when they go out to do their inspections. And it's from this data that we derive a lot of our information regarding what works, what doesn't work, what their hot button will be this year, what the hot button may be at the next site audit that they come to in our region. So from the Office of Scientific Investigation, guess what they have? Metrics. They're required to report these, they're required to collect them and track them. It does give them an indication as to how well clinical investigator sites and other entities that they audit are doing. In this presentation, you have a chance to look at all of the types of inspections that are overseen by the Office of Scientific Investigations. And they include post-marketing adverse drug experience, risk evaluation and mitigation strategy, good laboratory practice, bioequivalence, IRBs and IECs and radioactive drug research committees, sponsor companies, and clinical investigators. The one that is the largest every year, of course, the one that there are more of them anyway in the population, are clinical investigators. There are more folks out there doing clinical research under the pretense of being PIs than anything else that the FDA is concerned about. And they will go out and inspect investigators, not just here in the US, but also outside of the United States. If it's a PI who's contributing key data for a phase 3 randomized clinical trial for that submission's approval, they're going to visit your site. Even if you're in Russia, True Life, they will visit your site. They're going. So looking at the BMO program, Bioresearch Monitoring also audits sponsor companies, also audits investigators, also audits monitors, audits IRBs, audits bioequivalence laboratories. Here's their breakdown. And you're looking at over half of the inspections conducted have been for clinical investigators. And why is this so important? The role of the clinical investigator is key, but it's key for a number of reasons. Not just because they are the most frequent, but because there is so much opportunity for variation, for violations, for deviation at the clinical investigator site. And guess what? The FDA doesn't come out sometimes until 2 years after you've submitted that data, right? But the investigator is with the patient at the time the investigational drug is being administered. You are the ones, the clinical investigator sites, who have access to the patients, who are tracking and monitoring adverse events and serious adverse events. So it is your site's data that we want to look at. We want to make sure those patients are real, they were properly consented, and the data that's produced can be verified. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, we can use that data. So clinical investigators are number one on the FDA's list, as they always will be. But it also varies too depending on which reviewing body, reviewing organization goes out to do that inspection. Was it a drug? Was it a biologic? Was it a device? So depending on that, you also see a different group of inspectors that may visit you. But regardless of which body they're from, which center they're from, they all share the same pretense of understanding of good clinical practice and what it means to conduct the trial according to GCP. So more metrics for you. How many inspections is the FDA doing? I mean, it varies, but we're looking at 452 inspections in 2014 alone. And this is just based on what they put in the database as the start of the inspection date. So 452, not bad, right? There are far many investigators out there doing research, but keep in mind this number can fluctuate sometimes, and you might wonder what's the trigger, what's the drive. It does vary, but depending on the budget, and also varies depending on the priority of the FDA at that time. But guarantee yourself, if you're involved in a phase 3 randomized clinical trial and you're one of the highest enrolling sites, you will be audited by the FDA. What drives a sponsor audit? And that varies. The checklist and the criteria that we use inside of a sponsor company is different. We look at sites who have enrollment criteria, enrollment numbers that are higher than the other sites. We look at sites who've had more violations and deviations than other sites. And then we also look at sites where we get a report or a phone call from the monitor saying, you got to go out here. There's a problem at this site. So clinical investigator inspections will always be part of what the FDA focuses on, but the FDA is also true to ensure that they will give you advance warning, no surprises unless it's for cause, to prepare for an inspection. Because there's nothing worse than traveling to Russia to do a site investigator audit and the data's not there. Has to be there. Classification. So the FDA is big also on classifying inspections, you guys. What do they classify? I mean, the FDA goes through a number of things to ensure that you understand just how serious the inspection is. On the FDA's website, you'll find 3 classifications: OAI, official action indicated; NAI, no action indicated; or VAI, voluntary action indicated. The worst by far is OAI, which we're happy and relieved to see is never very high for the FDA, but there are some out there. If your inspection is classified as OAI, rest assured you probably will receive a 483 from the FDA. It goes without saying, actually. So if there's a 483 issue, there's an expectation from the FDA, and we'll talk about the FDA's expectation later on, an expectation for response as to how you're going to fix that. Just another classification of how the international clinical investigator audits have been classified by the FDA. You'll notice just a little bit higher when it comes to no action indicated, a little bit lower as well for official action indicated. But they are going to international clinical investigator sites as well. So what are they finding? You guys know better than me what some of the deficiencies are. You know what your biggest struggles and challenges are, but here's how the FDA classifies them. When they're looking at their domestic clinical investigator site inspections, the deficiencies are number one, over and over again, protocol. And that word seems real easy to put on a slide, right? Oh, protocol. But when you read the actual wording from the FDA on the warning letter, which we'll cover, they always cite and quote the letter of the law, the actual regulation that talks about compliance to the investigational plan. And this is a big one. If you get a warning letter that has a protocol issue, they're now going to go through every part of the protocol and tell you where you deviated or violated from the protocol. So you may have one observation listed on an 8-page warning letter, but so many examples that detail how the investigator didn't follow the protocol. And why is that important? Why does the FDA care that you followed the protocol? I'm going to drink water while one of you guys answer that. Why do you have to follow the protocol? So you promised you would. You told the FDA you would. What can they do if they prove enough investigators aren't following the protocol? What can they do to that application that sponsor company submitted? Not approve it, right? So that puts the company back at square one. And remember, these companies are high-strung and uptight, right? Of course, always. They're on a clock, right? Once they file their IND, the patent has begun, usually around the same time. They have 18 to maybe 20 years to get that drug to market and market exclusivity to sell it, to market it, to make money off of it. So they want to get that data in, accepted by the FDA as soon as possible. So there's nothing worse than hearing from the FDA, your number one high-enrolling investigator didn't follow the protocol. So the 84 patients that you put in your clinical study report, we're not going to be able to accept that. There's so many violations and deviations that they've created a brand new protocol. They did a study, but not your study. So you don't want to hear that. That's the observation we don't want to see ever at the sponsor company, but as you can see, it happens over and over. And why does it happen? Why is it that a protocol that you've been to a nice investigators meeting, my first investigators meeting was in Bermuda, by the way. That was back in the day. GD Searle, Opus Timmy, Bermuda. My first one, I was like, this is the life for me, right? No. But the audience was smaller than this, right? Because once you get up to present on GCPs, they all leave the room, right? All the doctors and coordinators and nurses leave the room. So I talked, but it was a very nice investigators meeting. Here's your chance. Third time, fourth time, you've seen the protocol to ask questions of the sponsor company with all of their functional areas there. Drug supply, medical director, medical monitor. Ask questions about the protocol. Can you do this protocol? Yet they do the protocol, monitor goes out, and we have a laundry list of protocol deviations and violations. And your statistician is sitting back home at the sponsor company squirming because they designed the protocol with a certain N sample size, with a certain power to ensure that those primary and secondary endpoints would absolutely be what we need to prove that our drug is more superior than our competitor's drug. Our drug does what it's intended to do. When you have protocol violations and deviations, you have now just destroyed that well-written protocol, that stats analysis plan, and that sponsor's opportunity to get that drug to market as soon as possible. So you have a lot of stakeholders who are now squirming, who are very concerned. So not surprising, but protocol continues to be one of the number one deficiencies that the FDA sees. And the FDA does not look at, read into, find alternate words for the protocol. They read the protocol exactly the way that sponsor company wrote it and the way you signed off on that protocol approval page. If it says you must bring the patients in 3 times a week and draw over a gallon of blood, that's what you have to do. But don't sign off on it, don't agree to it if protocol feasibility doesn't work for you. Also, records. Where's the documentation? FDA doesn't come right away. They come 2 years usually after you're done with the trial, 18 months maybe if you're lucky. So where's the data? Where are the records 2 years after the study is over? Who knows where they are? I've done investigator audits for a pharma company where the investigator had retired and sold his practice, and we didn't know where any of the actual documents and data were. We were told by a nurse, we think he took them home and they're in his garage. So we called them, they were in his garage. But you need to find out, if you own, we went back home and immediately wrote an SOP for our sponsor company saying from this point forward, if you're gonna move, retire, leave, notify us of where the records are, we'll bring them in-house and we'll store them. We'll put them in a storage facility, Iron Mountain or wherever, to make sure we can get to them when the FDA needs them. But the records are key. The records are the only thing the FDA will believe. As I said, any quality professional, we need data. Only thing they're gonna believe that the study actually took place. Anything else is imaginary. Anything else is a nice story, but without the records, they don't believe it. Drug accountability, consent, and IRB communication also top deficiencies for the 356 domestic clinical investigator inspections that were conducted. Different, which you'll see one item that's different on the other side for the foreign deficiencies was adverse events, 3%. And sometimes you'll find that depending on culture, again, I know you guys know about the difference in doing a trial in North America versus South America. Depending on culture, sometimes AEs are not reported. You know, not right to complain about a simple pain. So the FDA goes in and digs through records and says, I see here adverse events that weren't reported to the sponsor company. Why? Culturally, they may not be appropriate to do, so those are also found and discussed and may impact your final data. What's the frequency of clinical investigator-related deficiencies based upon post-inspectional correspondence that they issue when they actually classified them as, we're about to give you a warning letter? There's an official action indicated here. Well, for our investigators that were inspected, over 67% were protocol-related, 55% records-related, submission of false information, 12%, another 12% for the clinical investigator's supervision, his lack thereof or missing supervision, and then drug accountability. This is based on 33 official action indicated classified inspections by the FDA. So protocol continues to be huge and records continues to be huge. When an OAI classification is bumped up to a warning letter, then there's going to be even further pressure, further demands or expectations on your sites to respond. They're now going to start asking for a lot more information that even in your discussions with the FDA while they were on site, you may have provided, but now they want the proof. They really want to know what is it that you can give us, share with us, document to prove that this won't ever happen again. So looking at the warning letters, you will see that the highest one for clinical investigators, well, the highest number of OSI warning letters was for clinical investigators, with 11 of those that were reported in 2014 were issued for PI inspections. And of the 3 that I'm going to share today, 3 or 4, there are 2 for clinical investigators and 1 for a sponsor company. So clinical investigators are always the focus because they have access to so much more data, access and opportunity to really destroy a clinical study. So what is our warning letter? So I told you if you read warning letters, they are boring, but you learn a lot of information from warning letters. Tons of information from warning letters. So every now and then we do a quarterly summary of GCP warning letters just to see what the FDA found, what they're focused on, and what's important to them. This summary was done based on the second quarter of 2015, where the FDA issued 173 warning letters between April and June, 76 in the month of April, 46 in the month of May, and 51 in the month of June. Now remember, this is based on actual issue date. The inspections could have been conducted in the first quarter, but the documentation wasn't ready until second quarter. Of the 173 warning letters, only 3 of them were issued regarding GCP violations. And as of July 26, 2015, the web had only uploaded warning letters dated through June 30th, 2015. So there may far be more that occurred in the second quarter but had not been uploaded at the time of the search. The information here is taken directly from the FDA's website. They have a wonderful website to search warning letters, either by the topic, investigator's name, type of investigator, or even the classification. We look at GCP regulations as those that violate 21 CFR parts 50, 54, 56, 312, 314, and those others that are listed here that really govern good clinical practice. So what were the observations noted by the FDA? Well, in the first one, it was a sponsor investigation, sponsored GCP investigation, and there are only 2 things listed, but the actual warning letter is about 1 to 2 pages long. And the first thing noted is the failure to submit an IND for the conduct of clinical investigations. And you will see that this heavy wording that's listed here with an actual regulation at the end is exactly how they list it. They never list violations to guidance documents. They never list violations to work instructions or SOPs. They will only list violations to law. So they will always quote letter and line and item to the regulation. Also, failure to ensure proper monitoring of the clinical investigations. Monitoring is something that sites struggle with, sponsor companies especially. How much is too much? How much is enough? How much can I do remotely? How much can I do electronically? Monitoring is important, though, right? For a number of reasons, again. If you just think about the FDA and how long it'll be before you see them, it's the monitor who catches things first. It is the monitor the sponsor loves because that's our eyes and ears at the site, beyond the coordinator. The monitor will go out, take a look, report back if there are deviations or violations that may impact the study being successful. Clinical investigator GCP inspection. Here's another one with only 1 observation listed about not following that protocol, but the actual warning letter is about 11 or 13 pages long because the FDA went through each and every part of the protocol that had been violated. and summed it up in one sentence. You failed to ensure that the investigation was conducted according to the investigational plan. That's directly from 312.60. So that investigational plan, that protocol, once it's written and amended 18 times, you still need to follow it to the last amendment. You must follow the protocol. Anything that differs from that becomes a violation that the FDA can begin to say doesn't really meet the true intent of the original protocol when it was signed off. The last one of the three was another clinical investigator GCP inspection. And the first thing noted was, once again, back to the investigational plan. Protocol again. Another investigator who failed, for whatever reason, how minor, how major, this one was pretty major though, to follow the investigational plan. Did the investigation, but not quite according to the documented investigational plan. And the last one is about records. You failed to maintain adequate and accurate case histories that record all observations and other data pertinent to the investigation of each individual who got that investigational drug. So reading it, where do you begin to fix it? Where do you begin to attack a problem that's written kind of like that? But we do live by the detail in the warning letter. They will go line by line and tell you exactly what those deficiencies are. And then also, surprise, guess what? They will put things in the warning letter that they didn't discuss with you. But they're honest. They'll note that we didn't discuss this with you at the time, but we're now documenting it here in this warning letter to give you a better flavor for why a simple inspection may have been escalated to a warning letter. So read the warning letters. If you ever receive one, read them. Read them front to back, back to front, upside down. They make more sense upside down than they do right side up, but they're real. We really live on the data that's in the warning letters. We live on what the investigator was thinking, the inspector was thinking when he conducted that investigation, how he interprets the regulation. And from that, you guys, we learn a lot. And what we learn first and foremost is, what does the FDA expect us to do? What's your expectation? I can read you line and verse of how to respond to a warning letter within 15 days in writing to this. This presentation is focused a little bit more on what anyone should do regardless of what your role is in a company. If you're involved in regulated research, what you should do whenever there's an issue, before you get a warning letter. If you get a monitoring report that you don't like, you get a feedback letter from a monitor that you're not comfortable with, what should you do? And the first thing that I tell people to do, the FDA expects us always to take action immediately, which is why they give us a 15-day response time. No need to delay, no need to wait. It won't get any better. It only gets worse the later the response comes in. So take action immediately. But what is that action? We'll talk a little bit about that. Your focus should be, try to address any observations noted in that warning letter. And by addressing it, I mean, do you at least understand where the investigator got his or her information? Do you agree with it? It's okay not to agree with the FDA as long as you provide supporting documentation that counters what that inspector said. And then provide specifics that can be verified at a later date. If, in fact, you do agree and say, you're right, we forgot to sign this consent form, here's a copy of it not signed, here's our communication with the patient trying to get them to come back in, here's the new re-sign, that's the kind of documentation you need to show that, yes, we had an issue, we applied a fix to it, and here's the proof of that fix that we can look at 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. And what is the solution? So putting on my quality hat and forgetting that everyone doesn't believe in quality the way that I do and others do, your solution really should address more than just what happened. It should prevent it from ever happening again, right? Which may mean it's a bigger solution than you imagine. It's not going to be quick. It's going to be both corrective and preventative in nature. It's going to fix the problem that happened, and it's going to put in place systems, processes, SOPs, work instructions, guidance documents to make sure it never happens again for this study or another study that you're responsible for. That's the FDA's expectation. And how do I know it? Because I copied it from their website. Here are some warning letters taken. Here are parts of warning letters where the FDA had a chance to respond to what companies, investigators had sent to them. These are actually from the three that I just covered before, so they're from second quarter 2015. And notice the FDA saying your response as written is inadequate. They will read your response. And sometimes you may get your response in to them before they even write this nice detailed warning letter. That's great. But now they're going to also publish in the warning letter that goes on the website for all of us to read how inadequate your response was. So rush to do it, but don't rush to do it. Make sure it's the right information to send the FDA. But what are they looking for? They want proof. If you say you're going to revise your monitoring plan, send them the revised monitoring plan. If you say the monitoring plan will be much more detailed in nature to include every subject, 20% or whatever you're going to do, show them that actual document signed off, verified, and ready to go. But to just say you're going to do it, that's never going to be adequate for the FDA. When they come back a year, 2 years to follow up, they'll come back with your audit response, your inspection response, and that monitoring plan. They're going to see if you actually did what you said you were going to do. So reading the warning letters, you immediately begin to understand that they do want more detail than we're willing to share sometimes. You guys may hire consultants to help you respond to warning letters. You may find people in your organization who are very attention to detail. It is the detail and the specifics that they want. Without giving away a patent for an investigational product or a new device, they still want details as to how you're going to fix and correct the issue. What's the next one? Your response is inadequate because you have not provided sufficient details about your corrective action plan. Imagine that, right? So we're used to hearing corrective action plans in the manufacturing world. That's all we live on is CAPA. Corrective action, preventative action. It's a manufacturer's must-have. When the FDA comes in to do a medical device inspection, they follow an inspection technique called QSIT, Q-S-I-T. Quality Systems Inspection Technique. And there are 7 subsystems that every medical device manufacturer has to have. One of those is a CAPA subsystem. They must have in place an entire program, process, systems, people, managers who manage corrective actions and preventative actions for their company. So imagine every time you got a warning letter from the FDA, you're not alone to try to fix it. You now have someone who's a CAPA manager, CAPA director, CAPA coordinator to help you apply the best fix for what the FDA just found. Why do they ask for that? Why put all your bones in one organization? Why not just keep them buried and hide them all over? They want proof that as a company who's making responsible investigational products, who's trying to get drugs to market in a safe manner, that you actually have a way to determine when things go wrong and fix them. And with that data stored in one place, you now have a repository, an opportunity to train others in your organization as to how we fixed it the last time it happened. Because every day or month you're going to get a new protocol, right? You're going to hire new coordinators. Why not use that data from CAPA, from your corrective action, preventative action system, to train new employees as to what they should avoid, what they should not do, and how you guys overcame problems or issues you had in the past? Notice the last part highlighted in yellow. They also want to make sure whatever your plan is, that it includes preventative actions. So I give my students an example all the time of a simple corrective action. I had a flat tire, I fixed the flat tire. That's corrective action, but it's not preventative. What's preventative action? How do you make sure it never, ever happens again? That's the FDA's expectation for you when they issue a warning letter, when they say you're violating GCPs, is to put in place not just a plan to correct, but a plan to prevent. It may be a light plan initially with long-term goals, and that's fine. All they want is a plan. So notice here, they never said we want the final documented proof that this is over. They just want your plan. And your plan can take as many or as few years as it needs to take, but they want acknowledgement from you as a company, organization, sponsor, monitor, that you're aware that we have an issue and we have a plan for resolution to take us not just to corrective action, but all the way to preventative action. And on the last one, this is a nice one too. Your response is inadequate because you did not provide sufficient information to enable us to evaluate the adequacy of your corrective action plan. So they provided a plan, but no specifics, no details where they can actually say, yes, in comparison to what you've provided and done, it does seem like your plan will work. They want a plan, but they want detail too, you guys. They want to be able to tell that you're on the path to correcting and preventing this issue from happening. The last part, you did not provide any details of a corrective action plan to prevent similar violations from occurring in the future. This is one of those hot topics with FDA inspectors and us, all of us who are involved in the drug development life cycle all the time. We do corrective action, but we don't do preventative action. We don't go that extra step that it takes to ensure it doesn't happen again. And these is written right out of the FDA's own words in the warning letter to the 3 organizations we just covered before. They want more. They want a correction done immediately, and they want a preventative action plan as well as part of your total CAPA package. So what are the solutions? And I can tell you what I know companies have done before in the past when they're struggling with protocols that may not be the best, when they're struggling with deviations and violations. What do? Always seek clarification from your sponsor company. They wrote that protocol, right? So if it's crappy, go back to them and say, your protocol is just not working for our organization. Or you're asking us to centrifuge on a machine we don't have, or you're asking us to do things that violate how we actually treat patients that come to this clinic. Talk to the sponsor company. That's the first thing you should do. And if you get a warning letter as an investigator, as a monitor company, or a CRC, also ask the sponsor to help you write it, because their name will be listed on that protocol and attached to that warning letter. Even though you're the investigator who got it, it still impacts their protocol. Always, which is what I do for fun, read and review the FDA's warning letters. In those warning letters is buried information as to what the FDA not only expects you to do, but how they want you to actually approach your response by way of a CAPA plan. You get some reassurance that it doesn't have to be finalized, but it needs to at least be a plan. And then one term that we try to teach a lot of non-quality, non-manufacturing folks that aren't in a plant making manufacturing product to go out the door, do an investigation. Even in the work that you do with protocols and seeing study patients, do an investigation. When something goes wrong, how much data do you really have to prove you understand why it happened when it occurred? So do your own investigation. Is it happening only when Pam is doing it, or is it happening when John is doing it? Is it happening first shift, second shift, third shift? Do an investigation to find out how often is this really occurring. The FDA only found one incident, but it may be occurring far more frequently than you think. The investigation will lead you to collect and document data, and you need that data to prove to your bosses, to your boss's boss, that this has a significant impact or a non-significant impact on our ability to get the protocol done. Or it's going to impact our chances of working with this sponsor company ever again, or this monitoring company, or this CRO. So do an investigation, collect the data, present the data in such a way that you have what you consider the best metrics possible, right? The best data that you can rely upon every month, year to date, every week, to show to your management team that we are on track. Metrics will also show you if you're off track, right? You're slipping just a little bit. So rely upon the data, rely upon the metrics, and then always listen to your staff. So one thing that we teach in the Six Sigma Green Belt world and Six Sigma period is that you can't get anything done without the people who actually do the work. And it is true. You know, management's wonderful. We hold them accountable. We put their name on the warning letter. It's nice to blame them, but it is the people who do the work. So they can tell you where all the bones are buried. They can tell you what's going to work and what's not going to work, and they can also tell you what we tried 5 years ago and it didn't work. They're not just being stubborn. They're telling you the truth. We tried that 10 years ago. It never worked. Or I know the answer, but nobody's listening to me. I don't have a voice in this process to improve it. I know why it's happening over and over again. I know why there's redundancy. I know why there's a week delay to get our protocol signed off. So listen to your staff. Every person, when we do benchmarking exercises, when we do brainstorming, every person has a voice. Every person. No idea, no suggestion, no possible suggestion for why it's going wrong is considered bad. We receive it, we document it, we table it, and we come back to it at some point as well, too, before we get done with the final root cause investigation. And then do you ever go to your protocol feasibility discussions? When there's an opportunity to discuss how that protocol will work at your site, you should attend. You should always go. You should make sure that you get a voice to say, this protocol sounds interesting, but may not be the best fit for our company. And then track and monitor those protocol deviations and violations, because I can tell you we're doing it back in the sponsor company. We're counting to the nth letter of all of the protocol deviations and violations that are occurring at your sites. Because that's making the statistician nervous. All of a sudden, the data that they thought they could use, they all of a sudden can't use from your site. And I started out in data management about 1,000 years ago, where we had paper case report forms. You guys probably don't remember paper case report forms. Paper case report forms, data came in, entered the data, and we actually sat there and looked and counted and tracked all the violations. And we would give the statistician a report and update when he got the database as to all the patients you now can't use. And he would verify or sign off, you're right, too many violations for blood pressure, too many violations for the diet they had for a phase 1 study. So we actually made sure that we tracked deviations and violations. Hasn't changed. And then what's the difference? Which is worse, a deviation or a violation? Find out the terminology that your sponsor company is using, because they're not the same. One of them you may be able to get approved, one of them you absolutely never got approval for, so therefore you've done something totally wrong with that protocol. And then if you can, institute and put in place quality control review practices in your own organization. If you write a protocol, have somebody review it. You write the informed consent, have somebody review it. The QC part, quality control, when you have someone check your work, is a fantastic first step into the whole realm of quality control, quality planning, and quality improvement. It helps to ensure that at least there's another set of eyes looking at what you produce before it goes down the line. And then lastly, train your staff. As someone who loves training, I hate to see it on a warning letter response though, right? Because we always say, oh, I retrained everyone, we're fine. We got a 43, but we've now been retrained, we're good. Training is the last thing you should do. It's the last thing I put here, because you only want to train after you have something worthwhile to train them on. A new process, a new procedure, a new fix, a new root cause investigation, a new understanding of what went wrong. Otherwise, don't waste time training your staff on the wrong thing. Train them on the right things that are worthwhile. Oh, so what's the solution? The solution is don't bribe your FDA inspector or investigator. No, the actual solution is just take action. Make sure you act right away. When you know that there's a problem or an issue, as soon as you become aware of it, you should take action. You should always consider in your plan to fix, correct, remove, revise, who are my patients? Who are my customers, internal and external? And then who are the stakeholders? So who is the guy who owns half of the stock for this company that's going to be real upset? Who's the guy who's in charge of your IRB who's going to be very upset if we don't get these protocols done in a manner where we can actually use the data, represent the patient's data very well. And then always with every problem or issue that you're faced with, there's a risk, right? There's a certain amount of risk. My teams who make medical devices make tongue depressors, and they also make pacemakers. They're both medical devices, but there's a certain amount of risk associated with each and every one of those, right? And what they're going to do to fix this one is different than what they're going to do to fix this one. So with everything that you're doing, there's an issue. What's the risk to the patients? What's the risk to the outside population? What's the risk to a consumer? What's the risk to your family members taking this drug if it gets on the market and it hasn't been properly developed and researched? And then seek long-term solutions. The FDA is not asking for a quick, fast, and dirty fix. They want a plan. And plan implies at least 30 days, 60 days, 90 days before resolution, maybe even a year. So what are the long-term solutions that address not what's flaring up in your face? My protocol, has violations. What are the root cause issues that you're dealing with there? What is the root cause of the issue? What's causing this to happen on every single protocol that you do? So in our Six Sigma class, we teach our students how to do root cause analysis. We have a whole step-by-step process for it. You should seek a process that works for your site, your team, to get to the source of the issues. And I will warn you, it's never the person. It's never John or Mary or Nancy. It's a process that doesn't work. It is a process that is broken, that has room for improvement, that has room to grow. So the GCP compliance checklist that I promised is this: act, take action, act now, act often, and in your action, consider both corrective action and preventative action. They're both very important, and without that last two, the FDA will consider your response incomplete. So in that checklist for ACT, for acting, you should always seek to get data from some form of an assessment or audit. That means it's not subjective, right? It's not Pam's opinion, it's not John's opinion, it's not what the person walking down the hall heard at the water cooler. We want real live data from an audit or an assessment that's been conducted. So whenever there's an issue, a challenge to your team to being successful and getting protocols out the door and getting them signed off and getting patients enrolled, do an audit or an assessment of your current process. Audit means somebody who's independent, right? Not part of the team. Assessment, you can do it yourself. You can set aside time, a checklist, a process to look at what you do and how you do it. Conduct some interviews, find out if it's really working for everybody. And then the second one is collaborate. There have to be other functional areas within your organization that are impacted by what you're doing. So when that protocol sign-off is taking forever, talk to the other functional areas to find out what their process is when they receive your protocol for review and sign-off. Talk to the IT folks. Are you using the right technology to route your protocols for sign-off and tracking comments? So collaborate. Focus on the root cause, focus on corrective action, and focus on preventative action. So that's all my lump under C under collaborate. When you get together to work out the problem, there should be things that you're focusing on, but the most important thing is root cause. And if you focus on root cause, I promise you'll never come up with the person's name saying it's John, it's Mary, it's Nancy. It's your process that's broken. Your process for enrolling patients, your process for consenting patients, your process for conducting clinical studies is slightly broken. It has room for improvement, can remove some waste from your process. And then lastly, as a trainer, as an instructor, as an auditor, you have to transfer learnings. Once you figure out what the solution is, once you determine what the fix is, it's your responsibility and obligation to transfer those learnings across your silo to the other teams that are struggling with the same issue that you're struggling with. And by way of training sessions, lunch and learns, new SOPs, transfer those learnings to others so that they can avoid making the same mistakes that you made. And notice it's the last thing, because it should be the last thing that you do. After you have a root cause analysis done and you know what the issue is, after you have a corrective action plan, then train, then implement, then bring out the trainers to say, this is how our new process will look. Thank you. Any questions?